Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining this workshop on the 2021 State Climate Adaptation Strategy. We really appreciate you all joining today. My name is Sam McGill. I'm a senior facilitator with Sacramento State University's Consensus and Collaboration program. I'm just going to be assisting with facilitation of the webinar today. If you have any questions about sort of the run of show, or you have any difficulties providing joining some of the interactive exercises that we have throughout the agenda, please go ahead and send me a message directly. You can do that by utilizing the chat function, which you'll see on the Zoom controls. Everybody should have a ribbon of Zoom controls. Just send me a message directly or to all panelists, and we'll work to get whatever technical issues you have sorted out. Just a few quick notes before I introduce some of the panelists today. All participants will be muted throughout the discussion to reduce background noise. As I mentioned, we really encourage you to utilize the chat feature throughout the meeting to ask any questions to staff and the other panelists. And one final note, throughout the presentation, as I mentioned, several polls are going to be conducted. I'll explain how to participate in those once we get to each one, but please do follow those instructions closely. There's a variety of ways that you can join in those exercises. And just one final note, the meeting will be recorded and available following the discussion, and we will share the web link where you can find more information on the State Climate Adaptation Strategy website towards the end of the presentation. With that, I see that we have about 215 people joining us today. That's wonderful. So happy you're all able to make it. Let's go ahead and get started. I know we have a packed agenda, and I want to make sure we're able to get through everything. Real quickly, before we get started, we want to get to know you all a little bit. So we have one poll that I'll go ahead and launch in just a moment, and there's kind of two primary questions that we're going to ask you to fill out. The first is which regions of California you are representing today, and we encourage you to select all that apply. And the second is what your organizational affiliation is. Please take a few moments when that pops up on your screen to provide your input, and we'll pause just for 30 seconds or a minute as you fill those out. So everybody should be seeing momentarily a poll up on your screen. Go ahead and fill that out when it pops up. Just a moment. Yes, thank you. Stephen Andrews mentions that there's no poll yet. We're working on getting that resolved as quickly as possible. Okay. It appears that Zoom is having some issues with the Getting to Know You poll. I do apologize. There we go. It should be up on your screens now. So again, we're curious to hear from all of you which regions of California you're representing today or where you're coming from. And second, what your organizational affiliation is. So please take a few moments to fill that out. Once everybody's done, we'll go ahead and walk through the results with all of you. Give you just a few more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and display the results. Notice that a few of you are having some trouble submitting the polls. I do apologize for that. It can be a software issue on your end. We appreciate you bearing with us. Zoom always has some challenges with groups this long or this large. So thank you for bearing with us. None of the polls that we have today are required reading. We're just trying to get to know all of you a little bit. Okay. So hopefully you both have you've all had the opportunity to fill that out. We'll go ahead and pause right now and you can just get a sense of where everybody's coming from. So first and foremost, we see that a large number of folks are coming from the Bay Area. Thank you all for joining, but we have great representation throughout the entire state as well. A lot of people from the Sacramento Valley, Northern and Southern Sierra Nevada, the San Joaquin Valley, Los Angeles, San Diego, the North Coast, inland deserts, and the Central Coast. It's wonderful to see folks from from across the entire state joining us. Thank you again for joining today. In terms of organizational affiliation, I see that an awful lot of people are joining from state government. Thank you all to all of our state government employees for joining today. But we have great representation from other sectors as well. A lot of you from local government and NGO or community-based organizations. We have a lot of folks who are consultants, businesses, investors, and labor, special districts, academia, the general public. I really appreciate everyone joining, and I see that folks have figured out how to use the chat. That's great. If you don't see your exact organizational affiliation in the poll, feel free to share that in the chat as well. It's always difficult to get the correct title for absolutely everybody's different organizations out there, so we appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. At this point, we'd like to go ahead and jump right into our agenda. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Amanda Hansen from the California Natural Resources Agency and Nuantara Key from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Amanda and Nuantara will walk you through the presentation today and provide some background on this great effort, the 2021 State Climate Adaptation Strategy. So with that, I will turn it over to Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I am Amanda Hansen, as Sam mentioned, Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency. Thank you all for being here today and for letting us know a little bit about where you're from, who you represent, what organization or affiliation you're part of, and yes, please do use the chat. I'm here because statute requires our agency to coordinate the state adaptation strategy every 3 years. And this year, we're really excited to be partnering with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research to lead this coordinating effort. So thanks again for being here. I'll just turn it over to Nuantara before getting started.
Hello and welcome. Yes, a big thank you to everyone for joining us here today. We're really excited to be launching the 2021 update to this state adaptation strategy. And from our office at OPR, we're very excited to be partnering on this effort with the Resources Agency and really across all of state government to drive on this important effort. And just for those who may not know, we are doing this work through our Adaptation and Resilience program that we run through OPR, the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program. So very excited to be a partner here and to be kicking this off today. Looking forward to spending this time with you.
Okay, so I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the state adaptation strategy and outline our approach at a very high level to this year's update. I'm going to then hand it over to Nuantara, who's going to dive into some of the details and draw connections between this effort and the California Comeback Plan. Next slide, Sam. So every part of the state is being impacted by climate change, as outlined by the photos on this slide, which are all photos from California, showing flooding, drought, wildfires, beach erosion, and record-breaking temperatures. The governor made it very clear last fall that climate change is here and California needs to double down on our climate action in response. Next slide. The state has released 3 adaptation strategies thus far in 2009, 2014, and 2018. Each strategy builds on the previous one, and this year is no different. Next slide. We began this process with a survey to understand how previous strategies were useful so that we could incorporate what worked and adjust what didn't. This input helped us develop a few key goals for the 2021 strategy. First, we wanted to set strategic direction. It's going to be organized around the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve, and we're going to identify specific actions that we're taking to drive toward those outcomes. Second, we want the strategy to serve as a framework for action that all sectors and regions can contribute to. We're at a moment in time where urgent action is needed, so let's align and leverage one another to the fullest extent possible. Finally, we want the strategy to serve as a resource for all Californians. It needs to be easily accessible and dynamic, a place for people to find tools, data, and information on climate resilience. It should be a place where we can all quickly get up-to-date information on the state's efforts and see how their actions contribute to our collective progress. Next slide. So there's a lot of work being done to support climate adaptation across state agencies. We're finalizing the Climate Action Plan for transportation infrastructure. We're implementing the Water Resilience Portfolio, and we're delivering on the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. The State Adaptation Strategy provides a framework to nest these existing efforts. Given the magnitude of action taken across state agencies, the strategy is not going to include every single climate resilience initiative. It's going to be a high-level framework that allows people looking for more information on a certain sector or agency initiative to be easily routed to those details. Next slide. We're also working to identify gaps in our approach to building climate resilience in California through the development of the State Adaptation Strategy. Thus far, we found the state does not have an up-to-date framework for addressing extreme heat. So this is a key gap we hope to close through the State Adaptation Development Strategy process this year. Next slide. So through the strategy, we're of course working to align state agency activities, but we know it's going to take all of us to move the needle, and we want the strategy to drive alignment. We want to ensure that our priorities reinforce those of climate adaptation leaders across California, local and regional governments, businesses and investors, community-based organizations, California Native American tribes. We know there's a lot of work underway and that you all have priorities and goals you are driving on. So our approach to collaboration with stakeholders is intentionally designed to understand your climate adaptation priorities and how to deliver a state strategy that would be useful to you. Next slide. The strategy is going to be released as a web-based framework. It's going to serve as a central location for state climate resilience information that can be easily updated to reflect progress made and any adjustments in approach, and builds in connectivity to more detailed information on specific agency actions and initiatives. New Antara is going to go into more detail on a few elements of the approach I've just laid out, and we're going to kickstart that part of the presentation with a quick poll. Sam, over to you.
Great, thank you all. In just a moment, for those joining us online, you'll see a link to a poll in the chat window. I encourage everybody to click on that. Alternatively, as soon as I switch my screens here, there will also, a QR code will also appear on your screen, and you can use your smartphone to scan that and input your results. But we're really curious to hear from all of you. What are your key climate priorities? This exercise is a little word cloud just so we can see where there's some alignment between all 261 of you who are joining us today. So keep an eye out, keep an eye on the chat in just a moment here. A link should appear. Go ahead and click on that. Alternatively, as I mentioned, you can also click on the QR code that you see in the top left-hand corner of the screen. Go ahead and scan that with your cell phone if you prefer to join that way. So again, what are your key climate priorities? Already getting a bunch of great responses. Wonderful. And we'll give you a few seconds to read that off. I am aware that we have a couple people joining just by phone as well, so I'll read through the responses in just a few moments here. I see a few of you have inputted some ideas into the chat as well. That's great. Everything that's provided will be captured throughout the discussion. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause the poll. If you haven't had the opportunity to provide your what some of your climate priorities are, that's totally okay. This is just the first of many opportunities to provide input. All right. So on the screen there, and I do apologize that I turned it off. There we are. You'll see that there's some good alignment on a variety of the feedback that you provided. A number of people interested in issues such as equity in climate resiliency actions, obviously wildfire and extreme heat, sea level rise and resilience, drought and water. Those are all huge things that that are certainly reflected in the state's priorities as well, which New and Tara will walk through in just a few moments. There's a lot of other items on here as well: forest health, urban greening, habitat, wildfire smoke, frontline communities, things like ticks, and emergency preparedness. It's really, really great to see some alignment here, but let's go ahead and continue through the presentation. And I just recommend and suggest that people kind of keep an eye out for things that they submitted and where there's some alignment between the state's priority, the state's draft priorities that New and Tara will speak to in just a moment here. So we'll go ahead and deactivate that and go back to our presentation. Now we'll hand it over to New and Tara.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And it was, yeah, wonderful to see all of the poll responses in that word cloud that came through. There definitely is a lot of alignment of what came through just there and what we're going to be driving on through the state adaptation strategy. So picking up where Amanda left off, really to reinforce the administration's priorities and approach of really an all of government approach to climate. And we recognize that the approach for the state adaptation strategy this go round really needs to drive on a few important priorities. So the first is outlining the state's key climate resilience priorities. We're going to talk through this a little bit more in more detail, so I'll dig in more here in a second. But really outlining priorities that we can be able to track our progress against and understand and make sure that we're driving towards key outcomes in a way that we haven't had before in the resilience space. So really looking to drive on that. Second, drawing connections among our collective efforts. Again, amplifying what Amanda said, this is not just a state effort. This is not just a local effort. It is really an all hands effort to build resilience and respond to the impacts of climate change. So our approach is to really draw those connections among our efforts. The third here is to serve as a framework for action across sectors and regions. Again, I'll get into this in a little bit more, but really wanting to be able to, again, think about this as the state strategy, but also recognizing we need to be working collectively to achieve these outcomes. And then last, serve as a resource for all Californians as we look to identifying where there are actions going on to build resilience across the state. Next slide, please. So we're very excited to preview these draft priorities with you today. I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler towards the end of the slide. We're going to go over some ways to engage and to join in on some workshops to dig into these priorities more. We really want to have a deep conversation with everybody here today through those regional workshops on around these draft priorities. So today what I want to do is just walk through what our draft priorities, where we want to start this conversation for the state adaptation strategy update. So as Amanda and I have both mentioned here now a couple times, to accomplish what we've framed out for this 2021 update, we really need an integrated structure that supports action across scales and sectors. To do that, we want to organize the strategy around clear priorities that provide direction on where we are going and what we're working toward. So I'm going to not go through all of these right now here, but I'm going to walk through each one separately. So next slide, please. So the first, and recognizing we just saw what just came through on the poll and the word cloud activity, is a really strong focus on driving on equity and making sure that our adaptation actions are building equity within communities and also recognizing the needs of frontline and vulnerable communities. So one of our first priorities here is to strengthen protections for climate vulnerable communities. We recognize climate change just exacerbates existing inequities and amplifies weaknesses in our systems, and will not be resilient if we leave communities behind. Therefore, this is one of our key priorities that we really need to make sure that our adaptation actions are really meeting the needs of the most vulnerable within our communities. Next slide. The second priority that we've drafted out is around advancing public health and safety under a changing climate. We know that every climate impact affects public health. It also presents and again exacerbates safety issues. So we want to be able to really address those. For example, wildfire, that calls for both immediate safety responses during the time of a wildfire. It also can cause long-term health impacts from smoke. And we really need to be thinking about both the acute and long-term chronic impacts, especially through, around affecting public health. Next slide. The third priority is looking to build a climate resilient economy. Climate change is a material financial risk, and our economy relies on safe and reliable infrastructure, a healthy workforce, healthy natural systems, and stable supply chains, all of which are affected by climate change. So California, as the 5th largest economy, has already taken bold action to drive global climate mitigation policy, to drive funding, and really drive economies of scale to address climate mitigation. We seek to harness that influence and role to also ensure that we are building a resilient and just economy here in California. Next slide, please. The fourth priority, the draft priority that we have, is accelerating nature-based climate solutions. Nature-based solutions are actions that work with and enhance nature to help address climate risk. But many of these nature-based solutions can simultaneously help us meet our ambitious climate or carbon neutrality goals, while also reducing risk and building resilience today and in the future. So accelerating nature-based solutions to climate risk is foundational to our systems approach in how we think about climate adaptation in California. Next slide. Our fifth draft priority that we've outlined is making decisions based on Inactionable Research is a cornerstone of our leadership on climate change. From California's climate change assessments to the many different research programs across state agencies, California is committed to science-based policy. So driving on our science to action approach that includes advancing partnership-based research, really recognizing that research is only as useful as it is actionable in driving on policy and local decision making. So really wanting to make sure that our investments in adaptation are science-based, but also driving action on the ground. Next slide. And the sixth draft priority, which is last but definitely not least here, is leveraging resources for climate action through partnership and collaboration. Both Amanda and I have multiple times now talked about the importance of collective action to really respond to the impacts of climate change. And that's what this draft priority is really driving at. Again, the state alone, locals alone, regional, nobody alone is going to be able to solve these problems. We really need to be working together. We also need to recognize, and there's a lot of effort going on right now, and I'll get to this in a minute in more detail, to really support the capacity that's needed both at the local level and across regions of every region of the state to make sure that everybody can engage and participate and collaborate in finding solutions to these challenges. We also recognize that many of the solutions that need to be put into place have to, while they provide local benefit, really need to be implemented at a regional scale. So we're really going to be driving through this update to the state adaptation strategy to provide structures and really focus in on the priority of collaboration and partnership. So we're very excited to share these draft priorities today. I know I went through them pretty quickly here, and we're happy to take question and answer in a second. We have a little bit more of our presentation to go, but again, I just want to highlight that at our regional workshops that we're going to be holding over the month of June, we really want to dig in to all of these in more detail and get input from you all. So with that, I'm gonna come back here in a second to give a little bit more of an example of kind of how we're thinking about how these priorities will be structured in the state adaptation strategy and how we'll build around them. But before I do, I'm going to hand it back over to Sam for one additional goal.
Great, thank you very much. So as we did with the last one, we're very curious to hear from all of you which one of the draft priorities that New and Tara just ran through resonate the most with you. So up on your screen in just a moment, you will see all 6 of the priorities. And like I said, we're just very curious to see which ones kind of rise to the top for you. And we'll display those results in just a moment. And thank you for that comment, Arthur, in the chat. Mentioned that nature-based solutions is far down the list. New and Tara, maybe while folks are filling out the poll, are the priorities actually in order of investment or anything like that, or is it just a list?
Yes, it is the latter. It is just a list. We did not; are not presented in kind of order of priority. I mean, this is part of the challenge of addressing climate impacts and building resilience, is that we really need to be driving on these priorities simultaneously. So the order that you saw them presented here on the slide does not imply any sort of priority or significance across them. And Amanda, please weigh in if you have additional comments to add in there.
Amanda, anything you'd like to add to New and Tara's comment?
No, I was just going to make a joke that, of course, if it were, if we were putting these in order and I'm the resources agency, how could I not put it number 1? No, these are just all equal priorities that we are driving on.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so it looks like pretty much everybody has been able to submit a response at this point. Again, we're just kind of getting a pulse check here. So in just a moment, I'll share the results. And you can see that, probably not surprisingly, accelerating nature-based solutions is one that really resonated with a lot of you. But as a few of the chats pointed out, and as Juliet mentioned as well, Juliet from OPR mentioned, if you think we need all of them, you can certainly select all of them, and we agree. I think that's really backed up with the comments that New and Tara and Amanda just made, that these aren't in any particular order, and the expectation is to drive all of them forward. So it's really great to see everybody's input there. And as I mentioned, this is not your last opportunity to weigh in on this. Far from it. And in just a moment, you'll hear a little bit more about some of the additional stakeholder engagement opportunities. All right. So let's go ahead and keep moving.
Great.
And move forward.
So now that we've kind of gone through, again, high level, those draft priorities, we just wanted to add a little bit more detail in terms of how we're thinking about structuring the state adaptation strategy. So, if you are familiar with previous iterations of the state adaptation strategy, they have included many different actions, many different programs, and individual kind of specific projects in the large documents of the previous iterations. So for this, as Amanda laid out at the beginning, for this update, we really are looking to build a framework that then nests existing efforts where they exist and where there's already action driving on the ground and across different sectors. For example, the water resilience portfolio, as Amanda mentioned. So part of the goal here with what we're building is, again, that framework nests existing actions. So what we've presented here is how we are approaching that structure for this update. So these are, I'm just going to go through a couple quick examples. This is by no means the full extent of everything we're thinking about. These really are just illustrations of what we're driving at for the broad structure. So for example, under the priority of strengthening protections for climate vulnerable communities, we want to have actionable goals. So in this case, it would be to facilitate public and private investments that reduce risks for climate vulnerable communities. An action with a specific time-bound, deliverable and date tied to it would be to develop a tool to map climate vulnerable communities by a specific date. This example, just for those who may not know, is actually something that we are driving on and just launching through OPR, through our Integrated Climate Adaptation Resiliency Program. So just trying to give a little bit of an example here of, what an action could look like, how we want to tie actions to goals, and then nest them under the priorities. Next slide, please. So another example here is around if we take the priority of advancing public health and safety under a changing climate. In this example, we show how the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan nests under this priority. There is an existing goal in that action plan around reducing health impacts of wildfire smoke. And an action tied to that goal would be to launch a smoke-ready California, Smoke-Ready California campaign, prior to the 2021 wildfire season. Next slide, please. And the third example I just wanted to give here, again, just an illustration of how we're thinking about structuring and framing this update to the strategy, is from the water resilience portfolio, which includes a goal to unify action to pursue federal funding and cooperation. And then the action there is to coordinate with federal land management agencies to improve forest resilience and watershed function on federal lands. Again, hoping that helps provide a little bit of context and detail of what we're looking to build here. With that, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as Amanda mentioned, I do just want to take a quick moment here to drive the connection here to the California Comeback Plan, as well as to the state budget in general. So all of this work in the strategy does tie back to the state budget. Governor Newsom released his California Comeback Plan on May 15th, which also reflects our all-of-government approach to climate in California, with over $11.8 billion proposed for climate change across a number of different areas, including wildfire and forest management, drought and water packages, climate resilience package, plus additional investments through housing, transportation, and jobs sections in the budget. So as we look to the state adaptation strategy, while the strategy itself is not a funding plan, I just want to be clear on that. The 2021 update to this strategy will provide a framework to make sure that our investments in adaptation and resilience are driving toward clear and consistent priorities, and really looking to build off of the proposal that has come through the California Comeback Plan here, really to jumpstart much of the work that is needed across the state. Next slide, please. So now getting to the details of the next steps. Now that we've gotten through kind of our approach and the framework of what we're building towards. So our general timeline is to update the strategy this calendar year. We spent the first quarter of this year really driving on our internal coordination with our state agency partners, really getting internal agreement on this new approach. And we're really excited to be kind of launching this here with you all and to have continued conversation. We know this is a different framework and approach to previous updates. So, really wanting to make sure we had internal alignment to drive on this new approach and framework to the strategy. So over the spring and summer, we'll be doing stakeholder engagement, as we've talked about, holding those regional workshops. We do hope you all will join us and really give us feedback and insight around your priorities and how this framework can be most useful for you. We also are going to be doing tribal outreach and engagement over the summer, recognizing the importance that building stronger and partnerships with tribes across the state and how critical that is to building our broader resilience. And then, as we've mentioned, we also fully recognizing the need to drive on a much more strategic approach on extreme heat, are going to be adding in workshops over the course of the summer to help build out that existing gap that we've identified. So after following stakeholder engagement, we're going to be working to draft the strategy, building in input from you all and beyond, and then looking to do a public comment and additional workshops to get input on the draft once it's released. And then finally, releasing the strategy at the end of the calendar year. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Sam to facilitate the next part of the presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Nuantara. All right, so we really want to focus in on these stakeholder workshops. This event that you're all in today is really just envisioned as a quick primer on what the strategy will be. But we need all of your input in order to actually make it happen. And the first way to do that, which Nuantara just mentioned, is a series of regional stakeholder workshops that will begin as early as next week. The first one that you see up here is for the Sacramento Valley region. That's taking place next Tuesday on June 1st. We also have one in the Northern Sierra Nevada on June 2nd and Southern Sierra Nevada on June 3rd. I won't read through the rest of them right now, but what we would really encourage everybody to do is check out the website listed at the bottom of the slide, and we'll go ahead and get that posted in the chat as well. If you visit resources.ca.gov, I won't read out the rest of it, but you can sign up for one of these workshops, and that's going to be your opportunity to really dive into the materials a little bit more deeply. And as Nuantara just mentioned, really give you all the opportunity to provide your priorities and explain how the state adaptation strategy can be most useful for you and the work that you all do on a regular basis. So I'll leave that up here for just a moment. And Clessie or Juliet, if you wouldn't mind, could you post that link in the chat as well so people can copy and paste it? All right. And as we're getting that link posted for you, that's really the extent of the presentation that we had. We just wanted to give you some initial background information on the strategy and where it's headed throughout the summer and into the fall as we continue to develop and finalize materials. But with the remainder of the time that we have today, we want to hear from all of you, not just what some of the problems are that are out there that you all face in your work, but we also want to hear a little bit about what gives you hope in the climate resiliency space. So as I did with the first word cloud exercise, I would encourage everybody to go to the link that you'll see in the chat in just a moment, and which I'll also pull up on the screen, and fill out that poll. So in just a moment, go ahead and click on that. And we'll begin in just a moment. All right, so we're really curious to hear again from you. What gives you hope in the climate resiliency space? What are the things you see that are being done right now that are making your life a little easier, or at least more hopeful moving forward? Great, we're seeing all kinds of great suggestions here. And what I'm going to do at this point is leave this window open. Everybody should be able to see all of the great suggestions that are coming in on the screen. We also want to get some input from you just using the chat. There's been a whole bunch of questions that have already been asked. And what I would encourage all of you to do is submit any additional questions that you have that you'd like to hear a little more information from staff on. Go ahead and submit those via the chat. We won't necessarily be able to answer all of those today, But we want to get a flavor for the types of questions that you have, and we'll try to get through as many as we can with the time that we have remaining. One question that just popped up, Amanda and Nuantara, can you speak to how this the strategy effort is connected to the engagement that was done for the 30 by 30 EO, executive orders?
Sure, I can take that question. So the engagement that we are, or sort of midway undertaking to help inform our approach to achieving the state's 30 by 30 goal, which is conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. That is the same engagement process that we're utilizing to develop the state's natural and working lands climate smart strategy. And both of these initiatives are deeply connected to the issue of climate resilience. So the way that I would say that these things relate is that, internally, we are ensuring that the consideration of climate resilience, vulnerability, risk reduction are considered in a way that is aligned with how we're thinking about it in the state adaptation strategy. And very clearly, the natural and working lands climate smart strategy is going to feed into the state adaptation strategy. I would also point out that it will feed into the state's scoping plan. And the scoping plan and the state adaptation strategy are sort of the two overarching efforts or sort of frameworks within which all of California's climate actions live. So that's how the climate smart land strategy will feed into the state adaptation strategy. It's the sort of sector specific component for lands. I hope that answers the questions. Feel free to follow up if not.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Let's see, the next one, it was mentioned in the chat a little bit earlier, but is the intention, if we think back to the slide that had the structure of the plan, there were priorities, goals, and actions. Is the intention that the goals that are developed as part of the strategy will be measurable?
Yes, do you want me to, maybe Amanda, I'll take that and then you add in, please. So yes, our goal is to be able to track our progress over time. We know that, the kind of field of climate adaptation and resilience is quickly evolving, and there aren't single measures like there are in the climate mitigation space to really measure climate adaptation like you can mitigation. So in spite of that, we really do need to be able to better understand where our policy and investment and actions are driving down risk to future climate impacts and also building broader resilience. So our intent is absolutely to have measurable goals. I will say that there are probably going to be some areas where it's going to be easier for us in the near term to be able to track our progress and measure actions and goals more clearly. In other areas, it's going to be a continued kind of evolution and body of work to be able to do that. And just to add, a little detail as an example, we know that investing in capacity in communities is critical to reducing vulnerability and to understanding and minimizing risk. How you measure and track, say, adaptive capacity within a community is really complex. And, I just want to temper expectations. We may not be able to do that straight out of the gate. That doesn't mean it's not going to be an important aspect to the work, but it's just going to take time to understand how we actually measure that in and across California, such a diverse state as California. So yes, definitely looking to have measurable goals, clear actions, time-bound actions, but also recognizing this is a continued effort that is updated every 3 years. So we hope to, refine and build and make progress in those areas over time as well.
All right, thank you. There's a number of questions here about the relationship between this strategy update process and other programs. But before we get to that, the example of the Smoke Ready campaign was brought up when you were speaking about the California Comeback Plan. Can you describe Smoke Ready a little bit more? Is that something that's happening right now?
Amanda, I might ask if you want to describe that one.
Yeah, that is actually an action that reflects one of the outcomes of the Forest and Wildfire Resilience Action Plan. So we used it as an example of how we're nesting existing efforts that really, drive clearly on the state's climate adaptation priorities.
Great, thank you. And as I mentioned, there's a number of questions here about the relationship between this effort and other plans. Folks have asked how it relates to the California Scoping Plan, how it will fit in with the U.S. Forest Service and California Shared Stewardship Agreement, and a variety of other activities. Probably first and foremost for this audience, how it will also support local government adaptation.
Well, I think that's really a huge part of why we've undertaken the approach that we're so focused on. And I'm going to let Nuantara really speak to this because this is her area of expertise, but it's our vision that this state strategy really reflect and reinforce local priorities so that as we drive on our programs and work with the federal government and partner with others, that we're driving on our sort of collective interests for building climate resilience and addressing climate change.
Yeah, and just building on Amanda's response there, absolutely, echo and agree with her framing there. I think one of the goals of starting out and really thinking about the state adaptation strategy as a framework guided by clear priorities is to make sure that there is alignment across local, regional, all our partner priorities and the states, and that we are able to then identify how different actors and different sectors and different scales can help contribute towards meeting our goals and priorities. So definitely looking to have this update process really reflect those local and regional priorities as well. The connection, going to the question around the scoping plan, and Amanda quickly touched on this, but just to echo that as well, the scoping plan is really the state's roadmap to achieving emissions reductions, and then this go around will be driving towards carbon neutrality. We see the state adaptation strategy, while it is a slightly different document and governance around it, it is not a regulatory document, it still provides that same framework for action. In the scoping plan, we've got clear goals and then clear programs on how to drive on emissions reductions. We want to build that same type of framework through the state adaptation strategy, really recognizing the urgency of action that is needed across the state to respond to climate impacts. So, I think both coupling the scoping plan and the state adaptation strategy as equal pieces or equal sides to the same coin of California's agenda on climate is really recognizing that we have to both meet our ambitious emissions reduction goals and adapt to a changing climate simultaneously. It's not an either or.
Great, thank you for that response. Of course, and not surprisingly, there's a few questions about funding here. The first is, how will the proposed budget support local adaptation? And the participant notes that most of the money in the budget right now is for mitigation.
Yeah, I would, point, and again, this is, we recognize taking an all of government approach on climate can sometimes be hard to work through the budget. So, and finding these things. So, fully recognizing that, but I think there, again, $11.8 billion put in the budget supporting climate resilience and climate action generally. That does include funding across a number of state agencies to support local action, including potential funding proposed through OPR to support adaptation and resilience grants, as well as funding in the housing section of the budget, to support regional and local climate action as well, really recognizing the importance of integrating climate into our housing and transportation and land use decisions. And that funding is focused on both climate adaptation and mitigation. The other component is looking across the jobs section of the budget and really focusing in on the just transition and economic resilience components. And it's really, we are really committed on the state side to making sure that across all these investments that are driving towards regions, driving towards locals, that we are coordinating and working together so that you all can, who are trying to get access to this funding, can really leverage it effectively. So yeah, happy to, I think there's lots more we could dig in on the budget. Happy to follow on conversations there, but there are definitely a lot of places across the budget where we're working to support regions and locals in many of these efforts.
Well, and that really speaks to another question. The user asked, beyond just being a statutory requirement, what does the strategy help support? Will it help guide state funding priorities?
Yeah, I can take a crack at that question and then turn it over to you, Nu and Tara. Yes, it will. I think, it is intended to sort of reflect and reinforce our state funding priorities. So as I mentioned, we're nesting these existing efforts, and you will see that some of the actions and goals that are included in the strategy reflect our top priorities that the actions were very focused on, and directing our funding and our attention and all of, technical assistance, et cetera, type of resources toward. So yes, it is intended to guide funding, but also to guide sort of collective action in California. Nu and Tara, did I miss anything, or you want to add anything?
No, I think you I second everything you said. I think I just noticed another question here that's kind of related, so I might just add on to that, which is somebody asked, how will this effort help align other state agency efforts to create their own adaptation strategies for their work and jurisdiction? So, echoing what Amanda just said of the nesting where we've got existing action, one of the things over the last few years that we have seen across state agencies is previous versions of the strategy, while they have been, evolving each round and have been tremendously useful, we have still missed this kind of set of clear priorities that state agencies can use to help prioritize investments or policy decisions, partnership around clear resilience priorities. So we really do hope that this approach and building this framework will drive towards better alignment across state agencies as well. But I think it's really important to also note that we want to allow enough flexibility so that every agency can implement in the right way given their purview and their focus. So what it means to drive towards these priorities from housing versus transportation, natural resources, it might be slightly different actions, but again, contributing towards those priorities. So yes, hoping to drive towards better alignment while still providing flexibility.
Great. I know that we're getting short on time here. I do want to review some of the results that popped up in the word cloud exercise, but one that I know I can answer right off the top of my head. One of the users asks what questions will be asked at the regional workshops. So the workshops are really designed to dive deeper into the priorities and get your specific input on how those priorities apply to your individual regions. And what you kind of need from the strategy to continue the work that you're doing. So it's going to be a more in-depth discussion of the priorities and getting that regional level input. But Amanda and Nu and Tara, I don't know if you wanted to speak any more to the overall goals of those regional workshops.
I think you covered it well, unless Amanda has anything.
Okay. I do note that there's one hand raised, and I apologize to all of the participants. As you can see, we at one point had about 260 people on here, so we're not set up for audio for all of the attendees. But if you do have a question, please do go ahead and submit that via the chat. Let's see, one more. Will written submissions be part of the workshop? Yes, we'll have a series of exercises. And part of that is going to be getting written submission, sorry. All right, let's just take a couple more questions, and then I am sensitive of the time. Let's see, if the plan is not funded, how will it be implemented? Is it expected to provide technical assistance?
So again, I think the intention here is to nest existing efforts to the fullest extent possible. We have a lot of work that's going on. We are trying to create a space where people can understand how all of these efforts across a variety of agencies fit together and serve as the foundation for our approach to addressing climate change, reducing risks from climate, and building climate resilience. So this strategy is going to guide our funding. It reflects our top priorities and the sort of near-term actions that we're committing to taking to achieve the outcomes that we are driving toward. So I hope that that's clear. If not, we can perhaps work on some of our messaging here. But I think that's the best answer that I can provide.
That's great. Thank you, Amanda. And I'll just note and make yet another pitch, since we are here at the hour, to join those regional workshops and participate, where we'll have a chance not just to dive into some of the regional questions, but also some of the sector-specific questions and threat-specific questions that many of you have highlighted, be it drought resilience and response, wildfire, or many of the other things that have been highlighted here. All right. Just real quickly, the word cloud, hopefully everybody can still see that up on their screens. One thing that I find very encouraging is, collaboration was one of the submissions that received more input than anything else. I think Amanda and Nuantara really pointed that out a number of times, that this entire process is designed around collaboration and getting input from all of you who are actually out doing all the work in the field on a regular basis. A number of other ones that sort of pop to the rose to the top: youth involvement, science, I assume client science in that case, funding, indigenous knowledge, political will, public awareness, a whole variety of things that are really coming to the forefront right now for a lot of people. So it's great to see that input, and we really look forward to diving into that in a lot more depth very soon at the regional workshops. One other question that I can answer, a participant asked if we have a time for the workshops. All of those workshops will take place from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And Nicole Hernandez just posted the link again there. So please do click on that if you haven't already had a chance to register, and join us. There will be 10 of them throughout the month of June. So with that, we're here at the end of the meeting. I do want to hand it back to Amanda and Nuantara for any closing remarks, but I would just like to thank everybody for participating and really make a plug to continue coming to these workshops as they roll out. Amanda and Nuantara?
I'll just close quickly and just thank all of you for attending this kickoff. We're really hopeful that you'll join for one of the regional workshop options that might work best for you. Whether it's the region that you live or work in, or just feel connected to, or it's just a good time. We really want to use those as opportunities to dive into your priorities and to get input and feedback on the draft priorities we've put out there, and to also really understand how a state strategy might be able to support your work in the most useful way possible. We've heard some very clear themes today, so we've already gotten that started, but we'll go into more detail in the regional workshops. Nuantara, anything else?
Just a very big thank you, and looking forward to continued discussion with everybody. So thank you all.
All right, great. So with that, we are here at the end. As I mentioned, we'll prepare a summary of this discussion and get that posted up to that same website that you see up on the screen. We hope to see and hear from all of you very soon. Take care and have a great day.